My name is Sherry. I am thrilled to be opening my own coffee shop. My husband Ken left his job at a restaurant to join me. After all, it was our dream to run a coffee shop together. We don't have kids yet, but this shop we've created through countless trials and errors, from financing to location and interior design, is our baby. So we are eagerly awaiting for our grand opening, our baby's debut. One day, while we were buzzing around with preparations, we had a visitor to our place, right above the shop. It was Ken's mom, my mother-in-law. She's a laid-back person, accepting of our venture. I admire her calm character and kindness so much. I hope to be such a mother-in-law when I have my own daughter-in-law. It's still a few days early for our grand opening celebration, but she arrived with an enormous load of luggage. Surprised, Ken and I asked what happened. Then she said, "I've been kicked out of Joe's house." Just as she said, she'd been kicked out of the apartment she shared with my brother-in-law and had nowhere else to stay. I knew this would be a busy time for you guys, but... She looked apologetic. Her nonchalant attitude only made it harder for me. But Ken and I, we were both furious, not at her, but at my brother-in-law. Ken immediately called him. "Joe, Mom showed up alone at our place, saying she's been kicked out. What's going on?" Joe, remorseful yet firm, told us, "We just can't live together. My wife and I are also swamped, starting a new business, and we don't have time to take care of Mom, who's becoming forgetful. Could you guys take care of her for a while? Once we're settled, we'll come to get her." Though it served his interests, we couldn't trust his words. Joe had reluctantly cared for our mother-in-law just because he was the older brother. Joe's wife wasn't very caring either. They must be having a blast after kicking her out. So I thought of a way to prevent our kind mother-in-law from feeling lonely or pitiful. "Okay, if that's what you say, Joe. Mother-in-law, you can live with us." There was no other choice. Their father had already passed away, and there were only two brothers, so there was no one else to take care for her. I feel a bit imposed upon, but my mother-in-law is family to me too. I can't just not take care of her, especially since she's so kind and I love her dearly. "If you're fine with it, then I want her to stay with us too." Ken also seems optimistic. Apparently, Ken was always a mama's boy, so it may actually be a good thing for him to have his mother close by. "Well, thanks, Ken. Sherry. I'll have to think about how I can repay you." My mother-in-law seems to understand the situation, or maybe she doesn't. She just responds casually. "How about I make dinner every day?" "Oh, but you two are running a restaurant, so there's no need for me to cook, right?" I think helping your family is a given. But if she wants to repay us, Ken and I thought about having her help at the store sometimes. "Mother-in-law, if you'd like, could you help out at the shop sometimes? Chatting with customers, making desserts, spending time like that might be enjoyable." "Well, if it helps you two, I'd like to do anything." Mother-in-law happily agreed. If she considers it as one of the household chores, she'll probably get used to cooking quickly. Anticipating that, Ken and I talked about having her help with mainly cooking. With the conversation going in that direction, we decided to show her with the store downstairs. After we went down the stairs and showed her around the ground floor cafe and introduced the opening menu, my usually slow-paced mother-in-law suddenly became clear and assertive. "Ken, Sherry, this shop won't be popular as it is. It's still not too late to prepare, so start now." Ken and I were astounded at the confidence out-of-the-blue ideas our mother-in-law proposed. For example, given the current retro trend, even a newly built store should have old-fashioned interior and background music. The menu should include items that mother-in-law used to eat when she was young, to not only attract young people riding the retro wave, but also to appeal to older customers. Moreover, since the number of candy shops in our town is decreasing, we should set up a corner for candies, allowing buyers to eat inside the store, and would attract families with children. All her ideas were innovative and in line with the town's needs. They were so spot on that we had to agree, and under the direction of our mother-in-law, we immediately began preparing. After our mother-in-law started living with us, our long-desired store opened a few days later, and a month has passed since then. If the store had no future, the number of customers would significantly decrease after a month, but we don't have that worry with our store. We get so many customers every day that there's a line. All this is thanks to our mother-in-law. Sherry, the sandwich for table 3 is ready. Please bring it over. Yes, coming right now. Though I'm busy, each day is fulfilling. It might have been a real blessing that my mother-in-law decided to barge into our lives at that time. But one day, an intruder would disrupt our busy yet enjoyable days. It was my brother-in-law and his wife. We live in the same town, you know. We've heard the rumors. Your business seems to be flourishing. And isn't it true that Mom is being called the beloved granny of the store? My brother-in-law, with a sarcastic look on his face, glanced around the cafe and said this. Actually, we're thinking of starting our own shop too. A boba milk tea shop, which has been all the rage since last year. For that, we would love to have Mom help us out. That's why we came to pick her up. Give Mom back. Huh? Joe, what are you saying all of a sudden? Well, it was agreed from the start that she would return once we settled down. Now it's time. Come on, give Mom back. You guys have had enough of your good fortune, haven't you? It's our turn now. As if they can just return my mother-in-law like she's some kind of lucky charm. They can say whatever they want, but the cafe that the 3 of us created is just starting to take off. The real test is still to come. We're already relying on my mother-in-law as a full-time employee. If she were to leave us now, who would fill that gap? You can just hire part-time workers. A thriving business like yours should have no trouble attracting young workers, right? They'd probably work harder than an elderly woman like Mom. So Mom, let's say goodbye to Sherry and Ken, and go home together. At Joe's words, my mother-in-law agreed surprisingly easily. Both my husband and I were thrown off. Mom, you don't have to listen to Joe. You can stay where you want. Ken, I really think it's okay to go back to Joe's place. I'm sorry for interfering, Sherry, but it was fun working with you two. Come and visit us at home sometime. Without giving the impression like she was being taken away by force, my mother-in-law went back home with Joe and his wife. There was no time to feel wronged or bitter, but with the absence of my mother-in-law, who was like oil in our machinery, both the cafe and our home felt a bit emptier. That much was certain. Days where we forgot about time due to our busyness passed, and before we knew it, about half a year had passed. The cafe is still bustling as usual today. The advice from my mother-in-law, whom we haven't heard from since that day, has undoubtedly contributed to our success. I wonder if she's doing okay. I thought about calling her out of concern, but seeing Ken, who obviously felt abandoned by his mother, acting sulky, I couldn't bring myself to make contact. Welcome! The atmosphere at home isn't great, but the store opens today as always, and we have customers coming in. And on that day, it was not a customer who opened the door of the shop, but my mother-in-law, her usual serene expression on her face. Sherry, Ken, I've missed you. Mom, what brings you here all of a sudden? Mother-in-law, we were worried about you. You never reached out. Have you been okay? In response to our barrage of questions, my mother-in-law simply smiled and repeated what she had said once before. I was kicked out of Joe's house. They asked me to help at the shop, and I did. But it seems the business has been floundering. They told me I was a nuisance, so I left, and I was hoping to work with you guys again. It seemed that yet again my mother-in-law had been driven out for a reason you wouldn't think to do to your own mother. Ken and I began to plot our revenge on Joe, but it turned out there was no need. Joe showed up on his own, looking utterly worn out. Mom, why do you keep disappearing without a word? Both me and her are struggling without you. Joe's wife, also known as Her, wasn't present today. It seems she was overseeing the shop. Joe, don't make it sound like it's my fault. You guys said you wanted to cut labor costs, so I, being your family, decided to leave first. I then understood what she meant by being kicked out. If they wanted to cut labor costs, they'd first dismiss the ones who could easily be let go. Or my mother-in-law, who was at an age where she technically didn't need to work. That was not about you, Mom, but the part-timers, the students. We never said a word about you. Moreover, I don't want to be in your shop anymore. I don't want to jump into a sinking ship. If they asked me to finance a failing shop using my savings and pension, it'd be unbearable. Don't be like that. Come back to the shop and give us advice like you did to Ken. Didn't you say that even an old woman like you could give advice on managing the shop, and that Ken and his team were very kind? We also want advice from you. It's not a big deal. No way. I helped Ken and his team because they wanted to create a coffee shop like the one I worked at when I was young. A place where the local people can relax. You're only interested in your own profits and short-term gains. That's not true. I also opened a store to sell trending desserts for the revitalization of our community. Is that really so? Young people's trends change so quickly. You're not capable of adapting to such volatile changes because you're a business novice. Besides, even if it's trendy, young people are very observant of adults, and they'll naturally migrate to a better shop. Your shop might be novel and shiny, but the staff training isn't up to the mark. And customers don't seem comfortable there either. Just because you have experience working in a finance department and are good with numbers, it doesn't mean you can run a business well. It's pathetic. It's clear that the staff are blindly led too. With a sigh, my mother-in-law continued to speak with a sorrowful expression, as if lamenting her own son. In a small-town diner like this, you can't just mindlessly sell what's trendy among young folks. You failed to cater to customers' needs. You couldn't captivate their hearts. I wonder if you really aspire to be in the service industry. It saddens me. Especially since I used to be a waitress at a coffee shop. I just couldn't, and don't want to, work at your place. You should have said so from the very beginning. You were quick to intervene with Ken, but with me, you just went along with things. I couldn't intervene, Joe. Your shop is targeting young people from the start, and there's nothing I, an old lady, can make suggestions on. I don't fully understand young people's trends because of my age. I'm just an old woman who used to be a waitress. I can't live up to high expectations. Now please, stop making a scene in Ken's shop. You should go back to your place and deal with your finances. Joe, feeling belittled by his mother, finally blew up. Enough! Let's go home! If you say you only knew about coffee shops, I'll change my business and make it a coffee shop. You can give me advice like you did for Ken and make me a lot of money. Joe tried to grab his mother's arm and pull her away. Ken and I stepped in, restraining Joe. It wasn't just Ken. I had also lost patience. Listening to the conversation, I had been holding back words I'd long wanted to say. There's no way someone who can't even care for his own mother can consider the needs of complete strangers. You can go home on your own. And don't come to see your mother again. She is a coworker to us, not a tool for you to make money. My husband threatened to call the police if he caused any more trouble. And with that, Joe finally left. After that, Joe and his wife, who treated my mother-in-law terribly, predictably failed in their business and ended up filing for bankruptcy. On top of that, they were sued by their part-time workers for harassment and unpaid wages, resulting in having to pay a hefty compensation. Joe and his wife got divorced, and he was also sued for alimony, ending up in layers of debt. Joe, who had treated his own mother so horribly, couldn't rely on his family anymore. He would have to live and work alone, slowly paying off his debt. We heard about Joe's situation through a relative, but my mother-in-law didn't seem to care, showing no intention of throwing him a lifeline. I don't have time to worry about him. I'm going to be a grandma. I'm looking forward to taking care of my grandchild. Indeed, neither mother-in-law nor Ken and I had the time to worry about Joe. Our shop was thriving more than ever since mother-in-law came back, and we were blessed with our long-awaited child. Sherry, don't stress out just because it's your own shop. Work at your own pace. All of us, and our regular customers too, are most excited to see your child's face. Thank you, mother-in-law.